Yeah, you're really applying some. That's the most sort of. I'm not saying that this is extreme pain or anything, but I mean that was a sort of pain that was more intense than usual. So I thought, what could be? Is there something I. Was it just to sort of keep me subdued because my friend was over and I've been so off the rails today? Maybe. But I sort of wondered if it was something. Like, was it something that my friend was saying, and at that time he sort of put the pain in? Um, we were talking about school, like, I know that I mean, that's a part of what's happening here, but I think it's hard to tell what you were trying to tell me. We were talking about history or something. Did you want me to? That's so hard to know. I err on the side of, like I said, maybe just try to keep me sort of subdued, like, not to run my mouth off or anything, but to the extent that you were trying to tell me something, like by kind of like when you knock and it's like a word in a show or something, like on one word, signal me or something. I wondered if it was like that. Or about history. Actually, no, we were talking about prohibition of drugs and alcohol. And then we were talking, me and my friend's taking a class, and then she mentioned history class. I mean, is it based on how our thing is and the fact that it's very part of what may be happening is someone much younger or something is learning from what people like me put in? The one, I mean, so just in case that's what's happening, if anyone young is seeing this who isn't aware of the history of the prohibition of drugs in our country at all. The prohibition of alcohol is related to something else because but the prohibition of drugs has always been related to racism. Matter of fact, that's the point. Matter of fact, they were indoctrinating people at one point. Matter of fact, I think it's how marijuana became illegal. They were indoctrinating people to read the films and stuff to thinking that that if they were telling people by way of these sort of propaganda films that if African Americans or Latino immigrants smoked marijuana, they would rape white women. They're actually telling people that. Almost all of those kind of laws about how things became illegal, most of it was based on racism. But the the new incarnate, that's how it got illegal, marijuana and such. They wanted to, it was actually just for racist reasons. Um, but if also the history of our war on drugs more recently is of interest, the idea that what we do when we do things, we say we were fighting a drug war in Latin America all the time. The studies are definitive on saying that if you wanted to control the use of drugs, the one that doesn't work is source country control. That is to do something that in the countries where drugs are like grown and stuff. That's actually absolutely the worst. The best being treatment and education. The drug war is a cover for counterinsurgency in Latin America, because there are popular movements that would attempt to stop these insane dictators we put in power when we've been overthrowing democratic governments there for a long time, naturally. And then the free trade agreements after that these are things that devastate poor people in Latin America. Well, naturally there would be movements, to fight against the dictatorships. So the drug war is unrelated to wanting to control the flow of drugs. The history of it in our lifetimes and the reason there's military bases in South America is it's a cover for counterinsurgency against domestic counterinsurgency against right-wing governments we put in place. It's an excuse to use the military bases and paramilitaries that are the paramilitaries of the dictators we put in power to kill and murder, The history includes labor leaders, priests, and anyone who would tend to form a indigenous movement of attempting attempting to overthrow any of the dictators we put in power, who are very often they don't really have power except that they're backed by Washington. The drug war, the entire history of the drug war that we supposedly fighting in Latin America is entirely for the purpose of murdering and putting down insurgents who want a democratic government. That's the history of that. But then, and of course, then further back in our own country, the history of the prohibition of things like marijuana and cocaine, always for racist reasons. Oh, and also against American Indians. That's what that's based on. If that's why you signaled me, that's very important for people to know. It's also not taught in our universities. If that's what you were signaling me about.